So, good morning. Thanks for coming here early. Last I heard, there were people still dancing at Tresor. Did anybody come straight from the club? Anyone? Yes? Okay. That's awesome. So my name is Mark Zedel. I'm a developer at Ableton and here in Berlin, and I'm also on Loop's programming committee. So as musicians, we are always on the search for new sounds and new ways to make music, to create our own unique voice. And all of the artists that we have on stage this morning are also creating their own unique voice, but they're taking this pursuit into entirely new territory by creating their own instruments. And what's special about these instruments is that they're all electromechanical, so that they use electrically driven acoustic sound production. So they're not using sound synthesis, it's all acoustic sound production, but it's using motors and different things like that. So these are kind of hybrid acoustic electronic inventions. So as we'll see, this will lead to unique sonic potential and unique performance experiences. So we'll be hearing about their work this morning, and we'll be kind of questioning what electronic music means, and we'll ask what this work can teach us about music making. So first off, right here we have Koka Nikoladze, who's a Georgian composer, violinist, instrument maker who's based in Norway. So he creates many custom-built instruments, and he considers them to be compositions, and they include manually operated beat machines, motorized oscillators, and physical sound effects boxes. And next we have here Gijs Gieskes. Gijs Gieskes? Yeah, perfect, yeah. Who's a musician and industrial designer from the Netherlands. His work integrates repurposed consumer electronics to create electromechanical instruments in a modular synthesizer format, usually, but there's lots of different contraptions there this morning. And finally, we have Alice Eldridge, who is a cellist and a researcher from the UK. And her instrument, the feedback cello, integrates acoustic and electronic feedback to create a unique sound palette. So we're going to start off by hearing from each of our panelists and all of the instruments to contextualize the conversation. So we're going to start with Koka, please.
Good morning. Just a couple of words about myself. Okay, so my name is Koka. I'm a composer, and sometimes I make weird musical instruments to satisfy myself in a strange way. This could be an example. This is the mechanical beat machine. It's hand cranked, no electronics whatsoever, and it's programmable. It's actually an 8-track, 32-step sequencer. This could be another example. Soldering iron coil, some brass tube that I stole from my girlfriend. She kept her violin strings in that tube, etc. This machine was electromechanical, obviously. This could be another example. So these are the beat machines. Sometimes I also make instruments that are inspired by who knows what, but they look strange and feel good to play. So they satisfy me because of that reason. This one is called a stepper miniature. So this is an acoustic sound generator, basically. It's a stepper motor. So what we're hearing is the sound of the stepper motor. You change the speed of the motor, therefore you change pitch. So, and I make some completely acoustic instruments too, something like this. It's called a soundtrack box. Just to move very quickly, I do projects like this. And once in a couple of days, I make musical interfaces to interact with my digital machines in different ways. To establish a physical contact with the world of synthesis. This is my favorite. It's called a bow sensor. It's made from optical mouse. You can actually bow your laptop with it. Well, not all of the interfaces I make are weird. I make some traditional stuff as well. Like I'm trying to specialize in OSC controllers. I dream about the world where OSC will replace MIDI. Everything will be high resolution and fancy. So let's see a short film about it. And for instance, I have one of my devices here. It's called a Rotary Magnetic Bow. Sometimes I make instruments that could have been made long time ago, like in ancient Egypt. You know, like Egyptians, they had magnets and they had wheels. So it would absolutely be possible to put together something like this. A totally mechanical device. This is my version of eBow. It's a mechanical eBow. It's just a hard drive motor with a disc. That disc spins in front of strings. That disc has magnets attached to it. And this is what you get out of it. What I like about this kind of stuff is that you don't need to amplify your instruments. Now, I've used it very gently on the guitar, but if you put two of these in the grand piano, it acoustically sounds like a PA system, which I find awesome. The last video I want to show you, it's the instrument I finished the day before I came here. It's called a blink wheel, and it's an electromechanical controller instrument, basically. Blink wheel, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Koka. So let's hear from Gijs next, please.
So I brought a lot of my instruments, and I was thinking I can demonstrate them individually. And like here, this one is a machine that's it's kind of like a loop. So it starts here, and then the circuit like triggers something. It moves here, and then it triggers here, and then it goes around. So if I trigger it here, it starts. So then I can add like with the pickup I can add the motor. It becomes kind of like a breathing machine. So because it's a loop, I could also expand it bigger, but then because it looks kind of like breathing, so I kept it small like this. And then I also got, like for instance, this one here. It's a wheel that makes sand. Let's see where it is. It's the red one. So it picks up the sand and it drops it onto this, on the lever, and then it just goes, it's amplified. So I was looking at on the internet, like what's the easiest way to pick up sand and drop it onto something, and I saw these big cranes that used to dig up sand from the like for like these big machines. So I made a small copy of it with this thing basically, and so it's a nice way to make some noises. Then there was also this thing here. This is an hourglass. Let's see where this one is. That's here. Hear it. So basically, it works that by letting the sand goes down, and then the laser hits the sand grains, and then the light gets bent by the grains of sand, and it goes onto the light sensor, and that's when you hear this sound. It's a bit low now. So I made this installation for it because I also have exhibitions sometimes. Now that's automated, so it automatically detects if there's sound, and then if there's no sound, it rotates it around to the next position. And then there's also here there's some like a VU meter. I often use VU meters to generate sound. You can see it here. It's this. So here there's some. If you can get a close up from the top. So here you can see show it like this maybe. So it's basically, there's this few meter hitting this spring, and then it's just because it's so small, it can be, it has to be amplified by a piezo, and then you can still hear it, and you can get a lot of variations in the sound just by like using a spring or using some metal plates on the back to get some rattling and then adding some extra sounds. Here I also have a bigger one, which is I can turn on like this. It's it's a like a cooling thing from a computer. It sounds pretty good. Let's see. Too many wires. No, it's not this one. And then I can like slide it along to get a slightly different sound. Because they're all just slightly different. Or I could add some stuff on it, like I get a shorter sound. Oh, it's too heavy, this thing. But, and then I have also this thing here. Let's see if I can turn that on. Which is the purple one. It's here. Maybe I can just switch it. It's actually it's a magnetic levitation device. By this coil, and there's a sensor in it, and it detects when the magnet is like above a certain height, and then it drops the power and goes down again, and then it becomes, because there's a small metal, like a pin from a resistor on it, and it just bounces on the and here if you put it on like it can also sound nice if it's hitting just the pins or the plastic here. Let's see. Then there's also here some other modules, like here I have a ventilator, and you can hear the bass already a bit. So it's this. There's basically a light that shines on the bottom of the ventilator, and then the light reflects on the blades and goes to a light sensor, and it turns the motion into sound of the. you can get a lot of bass out of it. And here there's a clock which moves on the so I have to block the light, otherwise it goes into the sensor and then you don't have you can turn it on and off. And there's, let's see, I have one more here, which is, it's actually this thing here. So there's a magnet on this motor, and it goes by this the spring, and then the spring starts vibrating. It's a bit like your guitar, and then oh, there's actually something missing. There was some wooden plate here, but because it's all so small, it can change quite a lot. So if I let it run for a while. Starts changing what's happening because of all the vibrations. But it's kind of unpredictable where it goes. Like if it goes like something spectacular or not. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Gijs. Thanks, Gijs. And so next we have Alice.
Hi. So as Mark said, yeah, I'm a researcher and a cellist. I grew up playing the cello. I'm going to talk to you about our feedback cello project we've been doing for a little while. This came out of, as I said, I grew up playing the cello, but I wanted to use electronic and digital music, but when you're playing the cello, you don't have any hands free. So about 10 years ago, I started looking at using interactive digital music systems, kind of adaptive systems, robot brain type things, but I've never really felt that satisfied by it. So if we could have my laptop up, would that be possible? So this is, as Mark said, it's a kind of a very strongly hybrid digital electronic acoustic instrument. we were wanting to explore that continuum, I suppose, between gestural, acoustic, resonant instruments and programmable DSP processes, if you like. How can you draw a continuum between them, both sonically and also in performance? So I'm going to. It's quite an instructional talk. I'm going to talk you through how we made these instruments. It's a very much collaborative process, a project that I've been working on with my friend and colleague Chris Kiefer here, who you'll meet later on in a performance at 4:30 in the Makerspace. It's very open-ended, experimental in the kind of tinkering, tweaking, no fixed plan kind of exploration. And it was very much inspired by an Icelandic guy called Halldór, and this is the Halldóraphone. He's an artist and 3D fabricator. And having had this sort of itch, if you like, for a good decade or so of how can we bring together the kind of best of both worlds of digital music making and acoustic music making, how might we explore these? When I saw and heard the Halldóraphone in action, I realised that this kind of feedback process within an acoustic instrument with a signal that you could take into electronic control or digital control might have some kind of room, if you like. I'll skip through these actually. If it's not too early for an instructional slide, here's a diagram. It's a feedback instrument, so basically the output is sent back in as input, right? It's a very simple process, so it doesn't matter where we start in the loop. We can start with the strings make a sound. There's pickups underneath the strings. We can control the gain of those pickups in some way. They're amplified and sent back to transducers. So I've got some slides here, but you can also, you can see them on the instruments. So these instruments have pickups. They're electric guitar pickups, like electromagnetic coil pickups, one under each string. And we made 3D printed pickup mounts so that we can adjust the position nicely rather than setting them in the body as you might in a guitar. And then that signal goes out to they're actually car amps, a 4-channel 50-watt car amp, and then sent back in. So there's speakers built in the back, and we wanted to build the speakers really closely couple the speaker with the instrument so that vibration really comes back in. So have we got the sound from the laptop? Yeah, there we are. So we cut some holes in them, and it got quite late by the time we had to bring in some power tools as well for the other one. So there were instruments harmed, but let's say they were enhanced as well as first harmed and then enhanced. And then these are fitted in order to get a really nice close coupling. Obviously the speaker is very flat, the cello body's curved, so we've got these what you can see here is a CNC cut bit of spruce that we then sanded to fit the instrument body, and then these speakers are bolted in. They're just car speakers bolted in. So here's a close-up. They've also got transducers on the front, so more than one vibrating body, and that gives you a nice control. You can pan between them and oscillate between them. You'll see that in the performance later on. This is in construction, testing out where are the nice points on the cello body, where are the good surfaces to put them in. It works very well just putting it onto the spike, and you can get a really good bass response. If we ever find a venue where we can build the transducer into the stage, that would be quite a nice performance as well. So once you have that set up, the cello traditionally for hundreds and hundreds of years has been a string instrument which you typically excite the strings with your body. Yeah, you pluck the strings or you bow the strings, and that's where the energy comes from. Once you have this feedback system, the feedback is the source of energy, so it self-oscillates. Right, so in this situation I'm just controlling the gains on a mixer, not letting it get too loud, and as you adjust the relative gains, different strings will resonate. So whilst we might spend a lot of time controlling the Larsen effect, like in live situations, you might want to avoid feedback if you're a vocalist, or guitar feedback, which we know from Hendrix, etc. The difference here is that it's not just one sound sort. We've got 4 pickups, and we can control the relative gains of those. So you can start playing with the feedback rather than it just being this sort of completely uncontrollable force. But it's very much a kind of process of negotiation, if you like, and that's become the kind of unique thing that's grown, if you like, out of this hybrid. now is neither an acoustic instrument nor a digital instrument, but this sort of quite lively, complex thing that you sort of negotiate with rather than control. So that then becomes a key point. The negotiation, if you like, is both physical, but then also we can use various processes to control that gain. So in the performance later on, we're exploring. I'm at the moment following a purely analog route, and Chris, who you'll meet later, is passing the signal through Supercollider. So we've got now on this setup, exactly the same. The pickups come into a sound card into Supercollider, and there's a super simple patch. All it's doing is listening to all of the strings and basically saying if it's quiet, turn it up, if it's loud, turn it down, right? And then you get this, rather than the strings you having to vibrate, as you touch the strings, you let some sound, you effectively let the sound through. So it's silent, and then you get some sound. Might just get a bit more. So the strings, in effect, become the controller, if you like, that as you lay off. But as a complex thing, it's one of those instruments that you have to turn your brain off and not think logically about. So I invite you all to come later on to the performance at 4:30. I'm going to show you a couple of other ways in which we've had this set up. One of the interesting things, as well as thinking acoustically and aesthetically, if you like, about the different timbres you can get from an acoustic cello sound to a kind of screeching feedback to a more interesting, say, modulations, is also the different ways you can perform with this. So we've done some installations where the two cellos are kind of listening to each other and listening to the room, if you like. So then when the audience come in, they kind of respond and feedback from that. This isn't quite a noisy setup. So you kind of have an instrument which responds to the space and the people in that space. As a cellist, I was also interested in... Sorry, I'm just going to turn this one down. In how you can extend the sound and the gestures of the cello towards that electronic direction. So this is playing with a drummer and a saxophonist. And normally you can't get in their sound world. But with that feedback, you start to be able to get into that sort of multiphonic squawking of the saxophone, as well as the sort of the percussion of the drummer, if you like. And then we've been exploring as a duo the sort of the continuum, if you like, between live coding and a cello, and exploring as well with contact mics. So because this whole body's resonating, right? We've turned it all on its head in a sense when we're using the feedback as the sound source and using the digital processing or our hands and our bodies to control that. So one of the other nice things you can do is use contact mics, kind of like a stethoscope. So there, the bass sound you're hearing is a contact mic moving around on the body of the instrument. So you can start to explore these other ways of producing sound and other ways of using gestures in that making. So just to say, there's a range. It has a definite kind of sound world, but within that, there's quite a range of different timbres and textures that you can explore. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thanks. Coka? Cool. So thanks very much for showing us your instruments. It was pretty inspiring. It was amazing. So from what I understand, none of you have a mechanical engineering or electrical engineering background, right? So how did you come to do this kind of work in the first place? What were you looking for? What were some of the early experiences, or what was missing? What were you doing before you were doing this kind of work?
Well, as I mentioned, I had a mixture of playing music outside of any training, really, and then I also was really interested in dynamical systems and complex systems and evolution and sort of the sort of more abstract dynamics of how things worked, if you like. So I was always interested in that. That felt very intuitively musical to me. So I was always interested in how you could use those kind of ideas in an instrument and somehow simulating them. So for quite a few years I did models, like software models of those kind of things, and sonified those or used those in various ways, and it just felt quite unsatisfying. So to me it was just, really personal, kind of intuitive, very playful thing to say, well, what happens then if we start using a body that resonates and amplifying that and modifying in that some way. So it's just quite a blind exploration, really, rather than,
Cool. Yeah, what were you doing before?
Yeah, I was studying industrial design, and then I also wanted to. I went to parties, and I wanted to do. I did some VJing, and then but I also wanted to make music. And then I still had like a drum machine because my dad is in a band, so I wanted to make some plugins for this drum machine, but I had no knowledge how to make like a sampler or anything. So I just bought like voice recorders, and then used a speaker, and then if I put like a signal with an amplifier on the speaker, it hits like a metal pin, and then it triggers the play button of the voice recorder. So because I had no electronic knowledge at all, so I didn't know what a resistor was or anything. So and it's so mechanical stuff. It was my introduction to electronics design, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. And Koka, you're a violinist, right?
Yes, well, 100 years ago I was a violinist. I graduated as a violinist, but I dropped it away right after my the next day I graduated. So yes. So my story is that at the age of 19, I realized that I didn't know much because I didn't properly study at school. I was studying at a specialized music school, so I only could play violin, and that was it. So I panicked, so I wanted to compensate stuff, and I went to composition studies and tried to compensate some math and physics and some basic, elementary school stuff. And then after that, did some music technology, but I've never studied electronics or mechanical engineering. No, I work as a composer, so I compose music in the tradition of Neue Musik, if you will, for different ensembles, and I'm doing my PhD, which is now in a way related to what I do here, but in a strange way.
Cool. So I guess this is sort of the big question: is why do you work this way? What's interesting to you about this? And we've covered a little bit of it already, but maybe Koka, you can start. What is it about using physical instruments and designing things, especially for performance, that's interesting to you?
Sure. Just to compare it, I've spent enormous amount of hours with synthesis, and I've developed virtual musical instruments, etc. And at some point, I made my first mechanical device, and it was a super simple. It was a trivial mechanical device that would play a simple rhythm, but it was so fascinating. It was in the real world, It was not perfect at all, but in that imperfection, it was absolutely perfect. So I just had this very, childish fascination with the world, with this mechanical object. So I guess after that, it's somehow natural. And also when I look at when I see the audience, you know, people really like moving stuff. You know, it's if it doesn't move, it's bad. If it moves, yes, it's good. Yes, it's good. Yes, we like it. So it's like moving objects that produce music. It's so much fun. I wouldn't go further into any discussion. It's just fun, right?
And Gijs, for you, what's interesting about working this way? What do you get over using a MIDI controller or using a VST or something?
Well, I always when I made instruments, I'm always looking for sounds, like less for like making a song with it, but also I did a lot of making music with Alice DJ, which is this software tracker for making Game Boy music. And then you also have to do certain things to get like extra sound out of it, to get as much out of the instrument as possible. So, and it's similar with this. I just you have some mechanical stuff, and then you just try to get as much out of it as possible. Like,
cool. And Alice, for you, what's interesting, or why do you choose? I mean, you covered it a little bit already.
Yeah, I guess there was an initial, maybe more conceptual thing, but then in actually doing it, it's become quite a different pleasure, if you like, or interest. And that's that when you start making these things, as we've said, I'm not trained in any of it. I've never done it before. I don't really know where the ceiling is, if you like. Like the first time you got a squawky feedback, you're like, well, is that it? Is that all it does? But it's purposefully a very open-ended kind of iterative process. So every time we do a gig, we change it a bit, and then we play again, and it's just quite a nice, quite satisfying kind of unfolding. And every time you play, you're like, oh, I can do that as well, and you can do that as well. So it's this, I guess, a sense of exploration and of finding this new stuff, and never quite knowing whether there's more to come or whether that's it. It's kind of quite engaging, quite inspiring.
Koka, a second ago you were talking about the audience and what the audience likes to see. They like to see moving things. How do you find audiences react to seeing these instruments? They enjoy them, I guess, obviously. Do you think that people enjoy it because of the novelty of what they're seeing, or because having something physical that's physically vibrating that you're interacting with is bringing something out, kind of extra out of yourself in performance that's communicating with the audience?
Well, I guess presenting an instrument or showing off an instrument is one thing, and then playing that instrument is another thing, right? It's like the question does not have one particular answer, because some people like it because of how they look, but actually playing them and getting better at operating those instruments, and then, for instance, impressing your audience with how you play them is a different story. I don't know much about that now because these are so new to me as well. So I'm planning to practice a little bit, and then I'll see. I guess when people give you some feedback, some positive feedback about your work, they often use certain terms, right? And then after a while, you have some terms settled in your mind. Those are weird and cool. So those are two terms that are statistically prominent. So I guess that speaks of maybe how people like it, or what they like about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Alice, we were talking earlier about the fact that the cello is something that people already understand, right? And you're kind of presenting it in a new way. Do you think that people are? Yeah. What do you think that people are responding to when they're enjoying watching the feedback cello?
Yeah, I think it's really personal, and it varies hugely. So some, like, we had a gig the other week with a bass player on the bill as well, and he was like, I really wanted you to play the acoustic cello and show me, how the sound evolved from that into the other thing. And he kind of felt frustrated and a bit let down that we hadn't done that, and we were like, well, but it's not a cello anymore, because as soon as you play it like a cello, it stops being a feedback cello, right? You're stopping it vibrating. So I think, there's that, the novelty of the disconnect between the sound they expect and some of the sounds that it makes. And I think I mentioned to you as well, you'll see like you got a glimpse of this one. Instead of putting a lot of energy into it, it kind of has its own internal energy source, so you can make huge sound differences with a tiny gesture. So yeah, it's kind of breaking those expectations and kind of reimagining and rethinking what an instrument can be. Yeah.
Something else that's interesting to me about these instruments is that, traditionally we had acoustic instruments, and then we later had electronic instruments, and now we're coming back into acoustic instruments. And how has the sound world of electronic music informed the kinds of sounds that you're looking to make with these kinds of instruments? Is it influenced by electroacoustic composition or those kinds of things, or are you just looking for new sound? I mean, how do you feel that electronic music, kind of traditional electronic music, has affected this kinds of sounds that you'd like to make here?
Maybe.
Yeah, I'd say again that was the initial impetus was the sounds. So I don't just play the cello. Wanting to expand the sound of the cello was kind of one thing. For me, maybe it was more about the processes of music making and the sort of sense of time and those kind of things. Like when I first started to program was for making music, and that making kind of generative systems and that kind of joy in setting up processes which you're not quite sure what they're going to do, and then they kind of make stuff when you're that kind of joy of generativeness, and then at the other end that the gestural music making, and what one is like you're making music now in time right now, and the other one is time sort of unfolding in a different way, and I found in performances I do a lot of improvised music, and it never really sat well, like laptop musicians, digital and acoustic musicians rarely got along. There was a whole live coding scene, and then there was like acoustic improv scene, and somehow the fact that people had different time, a sense of time, made it hard to interact. So that was the sort of initial interest was that, trying to merge those practices maybe more than sounds. But certainly I think the way that electronic music and computer music and contemporary digital music has evolved makes us rethink about the possibilities of other things, if that makes sense. So maybe we wouldn't have explored these kind of things if we hadn't had a sequencer first. Right. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah. It's all personal, but yeah.
Gijs, what about you? How has electronic sound informed the kinds of timbres that you're looking for in your instruments?
Well, when I started, I had this 808. So, and then I guess my dream for this, I have this few meter modules that hit like a few meter hitting something, and for me, my dream was to make like make like a 808 with few meters. So it would be the same sound, but then mechanical and really small. So I was thinking maybe it's possible, but I'm not there yet. It's like it's pretty difficult to make like also to reproduce. So if you have like well, in theory, it's just that if you have a mechanical drum, it's this big, and then if you try to make it really small, I think it should be possible. But yeah.
Cool. Yep. Something that I find cool about these instruments is that because you're working with actual vibrating objects or bodies, you can kind of insert yourself into that and change the way that it's the way that it sounds or the way that it's vibrating. What is that like as a control mechanism? Do you find that there's some subtlety that you gain from being able to just reach out and kind of damp the spring that's vibrating, or kind of whack something to inject energy into the system? How does that change the way that how you feel about the music that you make? Is that
often the gain is so loud that I cannot touch the stuff. If I touch it, it will be very loud. So okay. I just have to do everything just because it's just often when people use piezo microphones, they use it for hitting stuff or whatever. But then if you just put a lot of gain on it, you don't have to. It's just like you can hear a feather on you're touching something with a feather that's on there, and then it can sound different. You get some new sounds.
I guess the difference is some of us might have played a virtual instrument with a mouse, right? And then what's the difference between, you know, moving your finger around and clicking buttons with your mouse and having a convenient controller in the physical world in front of you and then attaining full control, right? It's so much more pleasant to interact with, right? So in my case, I mean, I find interacting with physical objects way more convenient for myself than doing everything on screen and with a small pad. Or whatever other interfaces, but digitally. Another aspect to it is there is, of course, a great difference between sounds which are produced digitally and which are produced acoustically, right? You can, of course, imitate either or simulate, but I mean the authenticity. I think I can sense it when I do the A/B testing, let's say, and it obviously. It's obviously much more present when things are in the real world. So I'm changing my entire workflow and like making most of my sound generators acoustic now. So it's.
And Alice, what about you? Do you feel that you have some like subtle control over the music? Do you feel kind of that you're more present, or kind of that you're able to, because you're able to physically touch the vibration, right?
Yeah, I guess there's definitely something around the leading on from the haptic stuff that Lauren was talking about, and that's the whole sort of line of discussion of embodiment and situatedness, and you're really, if you're part of that whole loop, and in this situation you physically are part of the loop. Your physical presence changes things, and you're gesturally controlling things. Playing a bit around with Chris's cello as well. There's the use of these controllers. So the knobs from a mixer, fixing them as a synthesizer, if you like. This is a synthesizer with no unit generators, where the signal. This is the speaker cabinet, and these are the controllers which are sitting on the speaker cabinet. So you've actually got direct control. You're feeling the sound as you're controlling the sound, if you like. So there's a definite sense of being embedded in the whole process, which engages you. So I guess as you become part of it, is it more subtle?
Yeah, but
in a different way, I guess.
Well, on the other side, I just remembered something. I've seen performances where people performed with two knobs and like two oscillators, and I've seen some amazing, super inspiring performances, which were way cooler and better than a lot of acoustic stuff that I've heard. So again, I think doesn't it boil down to what we talked about right now, but at the same time also how you use the thing, right? So I think that's a crucial aspect, right? Sorry, I did interrupt you.
No, not at all.
So we're going to move to questions from the audience shortly, but before we do that, for anyone who's listening who might be interested in trying out to experiment with some of these things, what are some easy ways that someone can start to integrate this into their practice? What are some simple things they can start with to play around with acoustic sound for sound design or for performance?
Conrad, I think it's called, the shop, isn't it? Conrad? So you go to Conrad, you buy yourself a box of springs and some epoxy glue. You go home, you take a wooden board and you glue those springs differently onto that wooden board. You take a contact microphone, stick it on the wooden board, amp it up, and play for the rest of the day, and the next day, and maybe the day after. So that will be enough to play with for 3 days, and that will get anyone started. So
cool.
Springboard is my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, it's you can get also guitar pickups and hold them again, like by motors, and see what sounds things generate, like that. Or just,
So another suggestion: you can start with a drill.
Yeah.
If you have a drill at home, most of the drills, they go in steps. they don't interpolate between slow and fast. They go in distinct steps. So what you can actually try to do is to play the drill and harmonize with your left hand on the piano. That actually, okay, no, I'm not doing it when I'm alone at home. No, I'm not doing it when I'm alone. Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I'd say as well, just don't. There's so many ways into making things
Yeah.
now. We had a chat earlier, like we said, none of us had any training in maths or computing or engineering or luthiering or, and there's just so many ways in now. There's so many DIY kits and instructables and sample patches and ingredients lists everywhere that find something that the most important thing is just to find something that you want to do, basically. Once you've piqued your interest with a drill or some glue or some springs, think about how if you want to use motors, if you want to use whatever else, just don't be put off and dive in, basically, and do something that you're interested in. And before you know it, you'll know everything you need to know, or nothing. But
Cool. Good. Okay, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience, and I think there's a microphone floating around right there. So who has a question? Right here in the front.
Hello. Very inspiring work, thank you. And I've seen a lot of this work like being an installation, being a composition, like you said, Koka, or being in the field of sound scouting. And I was wondering, is it a thought to bring back the musician into interaction with an instrument and like having an instrument to be built for a lot of people who aren't into composition, who aren't into sound scout and into playing with electronics and coding stuff, but just want to get an instrument that's ready-made for them to play?
Well, that's a very good question, but also a very wide question. To respond very shortly, yes. And to be a bit more precise, yes. And on top of that, not only so it's not only about putting an instrument and musician back into interaction, but it is also going a bit further than that. There is a cool project going on. I think I should mention it. It becomes extremely physical now. So things become extremely physical because I'm trying to replace the electronic sound generator of Ableton Live with human ensembles. So I'm basically making hardware to operate musical ensembles in the real time. So you can still maintain your workflow in live, so you can do your loops and do your sessions, but then you can project your loops and sessions as a score to the ensemble in the real time. So it's a modular setting, so it's not only about putting musician and an instrument back into interaction. Well, not back, it has always been there, but it's also changing electronic sound generators with human sound generators and playing with different ensembles in this manner. So back to physical world. People used to believe that digital would change, would absorb absolutely everything. So everything would become digital. Kids would be digital. Food would be digital. It didn't happen. So yeah.
how does that work with for instruction or exoskeletons? Do you send an instruction to the violinist's arm or?
Yes, you implant this thing in their brain.
Yeah, triggers them. Maybe we can talk afterwards.
Now, you accomplish that with LED lights and custom PCBs.
Okay.
LEDs shine through the paper, through different bars of music, loops. They get a metronome, they get a dynamics blink fader. And then you basically can either program what they play, or you do it in the real time by twisting your knobs and faders and pushing your buttons, right? So, and the score is a firmware in a way. So you upload a firmware to the orchestra, and then you control it, or whatever. So.
Yeah, I also sell these instruments, so
Yes.
buy them for me.
So they're for sale.
Yes.
Another question?
Ask
from the
me
audience?
anything about that. So.
Don't be shy. Yep. We got two right here.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. So you can see that you have objects that vibrate and you control them through motors to make the vibrations and inject energy, but then you go back to electricity, you go back to speakers. Do you have any comments about this? Because in the end there is a piston vibrating up and down and you don't get the beautiful diffusion from the mechanical objects. I say that in the end of the chain of the process, you always, it seems to me now that I watched the presentation, that you have a loudspeaker, which is quite...
No, I don't have a loudspeaker. It goes from piezo into the mixer, and then to the PA. Yes.
Well, we're hearing everything from the PA speakers anyway.
That's why. So normally you don't experience your sounds through loudspeakers.
Yes, at home I also have a mixer and a PA. Yes, but I don't understand the question. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I mean the amplification thing.
Yes.
It's still, there is an electronic thing additionally to the acoustic thing, right?
Yeah.
How is that?
Yeah, there's always an amplifier. Like the volume is so low that it needs to be amplified.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the very end of the process, again, you go back to electricity and to a loudspeaker, while you could have the cello diffusing the sound energy directly from the body.
Yeah, but I like to make everything really small.
That's fair enough.
It's in a way goes back to this like fake real dilemma. Like, is singing in the microphone real or like is it fake? I think the absolutely charming thing about your work is that those objects, they have their identities. And like it's like a human being standing at the microphone and singing into the microphone, right? Versus whatever, a machine singing into the microphone. It's like, I think they bring their identity with them, no matter if you amplify them or listen to them very closely.
Yeah, you can hear them like this also.
Yeah, exactly. I tried today.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, and I think with these as well, like the speaker is, the transducer is a core part of it, but it's not at the end of the process. It's not the start of the process. That's the whole point about feedback, right? It's completely coupled within that process. So they are further amplified here, but they don't need to be. Often we do gigs where they're not put through the PA as well. Everyone thinks they are because there's 150 watts of vibration coming through. So exactly, this is the PA. They are their own PA, if you like. So it's on this coupling on quite a few levels.
But can you like pack, let's say, 8 car batteries inside so that you avoid plugging it into something, so that you can run with it, for instance?
Yeah.
If you, is it possible? Or,
Sure.
or do you use any external
they're
hardware?
12 volt. You don't need 8. You just need one. They're 12 volt.
Okay.
They're car amps. So yeah, we could go busking with them. I don't know if that helps though. Do we win anything by coming away from mains power, which incidentally is separated here. We've got a separate audio feed for power, so there's no. But I guess it's what are we trying to prove, or what's the point? And if you like, are we trying to? I don't think any of us are trying to avoid speakers, if you like. So there's not a.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
Well, one trick you can do if you have to amplify a lot, it's good to use a battery. Then you get no noise.
Yeah.
So on that note, I think we need to leave it there, unfortunately, for reasons of time. Just before we close very quickly, if you would like to see the 2 feedback cellos in performance, Alice and her colleague Chris will be playing in the Maker Zone at 4:30 this afternoon. So you can get a nice close look at them. And Gijs will be playing at 6 o'clock, also in the Maker Zone, if you want to see his instruments up close. So please come for that. And so so thank you very much for listening, and let's thank our speakers once again, Koka Nikoladze, Gijs Gieskes, and Alice Eldridge. Thank you.